Hello everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories.
Maya Williams stepped off the bus and into the cool, crisp air of a new beginning. Clearview High loomed before her, its massive, imposing structure filled with the hum of adolescent energy. She stood frozen for a moment, taking in the sight of the bustling school, its entrance framed by a wide concrete walkway. The sound of laughter and chattering voices filled the air, a sharp contrast to the quiet turmoil inside her. For Maya, the world felt too loud, too fast, too bright. She kept her eyes down, clutching the straps of her backpack with a tight grip as if it could anchor her to something solid. She wasn't a stranger to new schools. In fact, this was her fourth transfer in just 3 years. Some kids changed schools because their parents got new jobs, but Maya's reason was different. She didn't need a change of scenery. She needed a change of everything. Her life had been a series of false starts, and each move had been her attempt to outrun the ghosts of her past. This time, she didn't expect anything to be different. She just wanted to blend in, to go unnoticed, to slip through the cracks of a school full of people who didn't care. As she walked toward the entrance, Maya couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider, as though she was somehow invisible, a ghost drifting through the halls of Clearview High. Her shoes scuffed against the pavement, her every step a reminder of the uncertainty that followed her wherever she went. She didn't belong here. Not yet. The air was thick with the buzz of students moving in clusters, their faces familiar with each other, their laughter echoing like a language she didn't speak. Maya walked past them, a silent observer, trying to stay out of the way. She wasn't here to make friends or be noticed. She was here to survive. And surviving meant keeping her head down, staying invisible, like she always did. The hallways of Clearview High were a cacophony of sounds, lockers slamming shut, sneakers squeaking against the polished floors, the occasional burst of laughter piercing the air like a gunshot. Maya moved through the chaos like a shadow, eyes fixed firmly on the ground as she navigated her way through the sea of unfamiliar faces. She barely noticed the whispers that followed her or the curious glances thrown her way. She wasn't here to make an impression, only to disappear. But as she rounded a corner, she couldn't help but notice him, Bryce Carter. He stood there, leaning effortlessly against the row of lockers, like he owned the place. His presence was magnetic, the kind that drew people in without him even trying. Tall and broad-shouldered, he looked like he'd been carved from marble, his confident smirk a badge of honor. Around him, a group of jocks laughed at something he'd just said, their voices low and eager to please. Maya couldn't help but notice the way they hung on his every word, like he was a king holding court in the middle of a crowded hallway. She knew his type, the golden boy with the good looks, the perfect family, and the kind of charm that could make even the most powerful people bend to his will. It was the same story, over and over again, wherever she went. She'd seen it before. The bullies, the charlatans, the ones who thrived on power and intimidation. They got off on making others feel small, and Bryce Carter was no different. Maya didn't want to be his next target. She didn't want to draw any more attention than she already had. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As she walked past, someone bumped into her shoulder. It wasn't an accident. Her books scattered across the hallway, crashing to the floor with a loud thud. The noise cut through the buzz of conversation, turning heads in her direction. Maya bent down, face flushed with embarrassment, trying to collect the scattered papers and textbooks. She didn't have to look up to know who had done it. Bryce's voice broke the silence, smooth and mocking. Well, well, what do we have here? He stepped forward, looming over her like a predator surveying its prey. Maya froze as the sound of Bryce's voice sliced through the tension in the air. It was smooth, controlled, laced with the kind of amusement that only came from someone who was used to getting exactly what they wanted. She didn't have to look up to know that he was standing over her, towering like some kind of immovable force, a shadow cast long over her small form. His friends, a pack of loyal followers, snickered behind him, the sound like a distant echo of a game she had no interest in playing. Well, well, what do we have here? Bryce's words were slow, almost teasing, but there was a cold edge beneath the mockery. Maya could feel it, the weight of his gaze, the silent expectation that she would react. that she would show the fear he was so used to seeing in others. His eyes roamed over her, lingering as if waiting for her to flinch, to break under the pressure of his attention. She didn't flinch. Instead, Maya reached down, hands steady, gathering the books that had spilled across the cold floor. She kept her movements calm, measured, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her face remained composed, a mask of indifference. Slowly, she straightened, standing tall despite the pounding anxiety inside her. Bryce watched her, his smirk never wavering, his arms crossed in that cocky, unbothered way that made everyone around him feel like they were beneath him. "I don't think I've seen you before," he said, his voice low, almost predatory. Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. She simply gathered the last of her books and stood, brushing past him without a word, without even sparing him a glance. But Bryce wasn't done. "Hey, where's your manners?" His voice rang out, carrying through the hallway, loud enough for everyone to hear. She ignored him, pushing forward, hoping that if she didn't acknowledge him, he would simply lose interest. But that wasn't how Bryce Carter worked. A sharp tug on her backpack made her stop dead in her tracks. Maya's breath caught in her throat, the weight of his persistence like a heavy hand on her back. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his expression. Maybe it was surprise, maybe curiosity, but whatever it was, it made her stomach tighten. "You shouldn't have done that," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper, but there was a steel to it that made Bryce's smirk falter just for a second. He laughed, that same mocking sound, but it was thinner now, uncertain. "And why is that?" he asked, the arrogance never quite slipping from his tone, though it was clearly rattled. Maya didn't answer. She just held his gaze, unflinching, before turning away and walking off without another word. But Bryce Carter wasn't the type to let things go. She could feel his eyes on her, the tension building as she made her way down the hallway. He had no idea what kind of mistake he had just made. The rest of the day passed in a blur of motion and noise, Maya drifting through it all like a ghost in a crowded room. Her footsteps echoed through the hallways, the buzz of students filling her ears. But she stayed firmly in her own world, her mind quiet despite the chaos around her. She stuck to the back of the classroom, answering only when absolutely necessary, her eyes avoiding the curious stares from her classmates. It was a routine she was familiar with. Hide, blend in, keep moving forward. Lunchtime arrived, and Maya found herself a quiet corner in the cafeteria, far from the laughter and the chatter, where she could observe without being observed. She always preferred the edge of things, watching the world unfold without ever really becoming part of it. From here, she could see Bryce and his pack of followers at their usual spot, at the center of it all, the loudest table in the room. They were laughing, talking, their voices a constant hum, like a well-rehearsed performance. Maya didn't pay much attention to the words. They were just noise. What caught her attention was the way everyone catered to him, how even the most confident kids seemed to shrink in his presence. She watched as he leaned back in his chair, a casual king of this little kingdom he ruled. And for a moment, Maya felt the familiar knot of frustration twist in her stomach. She didn't care about his power, but she could feel the weight of it pressing down on everyone around her. Bryce caught her gaze from across the room, his eyes flickering toward her as if searching for some reaction, some sign that she was bothered by his presence. But Maya didn't flinch. She simply continued eating, her movements slow and deliberate, refusing to give him the satisfaction of knowing he had any hold over her. When the final bell rang, Maya was eager to leave. The heat of Houston hung thick in the air as she walked toward the bus stop, the sun low in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement. Her phone buzzed in her pocket just as she reached for it, and that was when she heard a voice behind her. "Hey, new girl," Bryce called out, his voice carrying through the air, smooth and taunting. Maya turned slowly, her face unreadable as he walked up to her, hands shoved in his pockets, that cocky grin still plastered on his face. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone flat, the question hanging in the air between them like a challenge. Bryce took a step closer, his grin widening. "You got an attitude problem," he said, his voice thick with amusement. Maya didn't back down. She simply looked at him, waiting for the punchline. The silence stretched on, and just as she thought he would speak again, she gave him the faintest smile, a quiet, knowing expression that seemed to confuse him for a split second. "I think you should walk away," she said, her voice calm but carrying a sharp edge, one that caught him off guard. For a moment he hesitated, but then the smirk returned, a little more forced this time, before he spoke again, his voice a touch more uncertain. "And why is that?" Maya didn't answer. She simply turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him standing there, staring after her, a flicker of something. Maybe surprise, maybe doubt, lingering in his eyes. The next day, the tension between Maya and Bryce simmered just beneath the surface, palpable to anyone who cared to look. Maya walked through the halls with the weight of 1,000 glances on her, the whispers trailing behind her like shadows. But she didn't care. She had learned long ago how to wear invisibility like a shield, to become a ghost in the crowd, unnoticed and untouchable. She moved past clusters of students, her steps steady, her face unreadable. Yet, despite her calm exterior, she could feel the eyes of Bryce's crew tracking her every move, could almost taste the irritation building in the air. Lunchtime arrived, and Maya found herself walking into the cafeteria, her gaze flicking toward the familiar table at the center of the room. Bryce and his friends were sitting there, their voices rising above the noise, as if the world should bow down to their every word. As she walked past them, something sharp and scrapey scraped against her foot. She stumbled, almost dropping her tray, but caught herself at the last second. The laughter came quickly, the mocking sound of Ryan, one of Bryce's goons, grinning as he looked down at her. "No comeback, princess?" he sneered, the challenge hanging in the air like a dare. Maya paused, her lips curling into a small, almost amused smile. She straightened up, her tray steady in her hands, and her gaze shifted to Ryan, unblinking. "I didn't realize cavemen still existed," she said, her voice steady, laced with just the right amount of bite. The room fell silent for a beat, the words hanging in the air. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, and Ryan's grin faltered. His friends shifted uncomfortably, clearly not sure whether they should laugh or pretend they didn't hear her. Bryce, watching from the sidelines, tilted his head slightly, his brow furrowing as he tried to read her. Maya didn't wait for them to react. She simply walked past them, heading for her usual seat at the edge of the cafeteria. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, but her face remained calm, unbothered. She could feel Bryce's eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. She knew this was only the beginning. Bryce wasn't the type to let things slide. He would come for her again, but she would be ready. It wasn't about the fight. It was about waiting for him to hang himself with his own arrogance. And Maya, she was patient. The day had barely ended when Maya walked toward her locker, the last bell of the day echoing through the halls. The usual buzz of students heading for the exits filled the air, but Maya's mind was elsewhere, her thoughts calm and composed. As she approached her locker, however, something felt off. The hallway was quieter than usual. There was an eerie stillness, a tension that hung in the air. She glanced around, her eyes narrowing as she reached her locker. Her heart dropped when she saw it. Her locker was completely trashed. Books and papers were strewn across the floor in a chaotic mess. The metal door was covered in Sharpie marks, crude drawings, and nasty words that made her stomach twist in disgust. Maya stood there for a moment, frozen, taking in the mess. It was a cheap shot, an attempt to break her, to get under her skin. But instead of anger, there was only a quiet sense of resolve that washed over her. She didn't flinch. She didn't let her hands shake. Instead, Maya bent down, one by one, collecting the scattered papers and textbooks, stacking them neatly in her arms. The sounds of the other students grew louder around her, their whispers growing thicker as they gathered in small, curious groups. They waited for her to crack, for her to lose control, for the rage they expected to see. But Maya did nothing to give them what they wanted. She simply went about her business, her face as calm and serene as ever. The whispers around her grew, some mocking, some curious, but she ignored them. Bryce was somewhere behind her, watching, waiting for her to react, but there was nothing to react to. Maya finished picking up the last of her books and shut her locker with a soft click. No words, no outburst, just silence. She straightened up, adjusted her backpack, and walked away. The looks followed her, but she didn't care. What Bryce and his friends didn't understand was that Maya wasn't the kind of person who would burn with rage. She was the kind of person who would let the fire simmer until it burned them all. That evening, Maya sat at the kitchen table, her fingers drumming idly against the wooden surface. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Her mind was far from the calm, empty silence around her. Today had been another test, another push. Her locker had been trashed, her peace disturbed, but still, she remained unbroken. Maya looked across the room at Vin Diesel, leaning against the counter, arms crossed in his usual effortless way. He didn't ask any questions, didn't probe for details. He was just watching her, waiting for her to speak. "They trashed my locker today," she finally said, her voice flat, the words hanging in the air between them like a quiet storm. It was nothing new. She had known it was coming. Bryce and his friends had been looking for a way to make her flinch, to break her. But they didn't realize they weren't dealing with someone who could be easily shattered. Vin didn't say anything for a long moment. His gaze was steady, calm, almost contemplative, as though he was processing the situation in his quiet, calculated way. Then, with a soft exhale, he spoke, his voice smooth and assured. "That's their best move, huh?" Maya couldn't help but let a small, ironic smile tug at her lips. "For now," she replied, her eyes glinting with something darker, something they hadn't seen yet. She wasn't just a target to be bullied. She was patient, and patience was the one thing they wouldn't see coming. Vin studied her closely, an understanding flickering in his eyes. "So, what's your next move?" Maya paused, exhaling deeply, as the weight of the moment settled into her bones. "I'm going to let him dig his own grave," she said, the words coming out with quiet resolve. There was no need for a fight. She didn't need to throw punches to win. Vin's smile grew. "That's my girl." His voice was filled with pride, but more than that, it was filled with something else, an understanding that the real power wasn't in acting out, but in waiting, watching, and letting the other side fall apart on their own. Maya nodded slowly, a feeling of control settling deep within her. They had no idea who they were messing with. The next morning, Maya walked through the halls of Clearview High with an air of quiet confidence that seemed to pulse around her like an invisible shield. She could feel the weight of every gaze on her, the whispers weaving through the crowd like a restless current. It was a different kind of attention this time. Yesterday, she was the girl who had Vin Diesel pick her up in a muscle car. But today, she was the girl who had survived Bryce's little attempt at intimidation, and the rumors were spreading like wildfire. Maya walked past groups of students, their eyes flicking toward her, some curious, others amused. But she kept her gaze forward, unfazed. The sound of Bryce's voice echoed in her mind as she approached her locker, his smug, taunting tone still ringing in her ears from yesterday. "What? You think you're better than me?" It was nothing but noise. Maya had learned how to tune it out long ago. She focused on the rhythm of her steps, the soft hum of the hallway around her, until she spotted him. Bryce, leaning against the lockers with his usual entourage. They were laughing, the sound of their voices sharp and insistent, but there was something different about him today. His usual cocky smirk was gone. Instead, his jaw was set, eyes flickering toward her as she walked by, daring her to break, to react. But Maya didn't give him the satisfaction. She didn't even slow her pace. She passed him with the slightest tilt of her chin, her expression cool, her movements unhurried. For a brief second, she met his gaze. The power was no longer his. He was watching her, waiting for a flicker of insecurity. But all he got was a quiet, steady calm that seemed to ripple in the space between them. The murmur of voices behind her grew louder as she walked on, but she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Bryce, standing frozen against the lockers, couldn't seem to shake the feeling that something was off. Maya hadn't flinched. She hadn't played into his game. And in that silence, she had already won. By lunchtime, the atmosphere at Clearview High had shifted. Maya could feel it in the air, the electricity crackling around her, the subtle change in the way people looked at her. Yesterday, she was the new girl, the one who had gotten the star quarterback's attention. Today, she was something else. The whispers had grown louder. The curiosity of the student body now mixed with something darker, something more unsettled. She walked into the cafeteria, feeling the weight of their eyes on her, but she didn't waver. She didn't even flinch as she made her way through the crowded room. Bryce was there, of course. His usual spot was at the center, where he and his friends held court. But today, there was something different in the way they looked at her. As Maya passed their table, Bryce's voice rang out, breaking through the noise of the cafeteria. "Hey, Maya, still crying about your little locker?" he called. His words dripping with sarcasm, hoping to get a rise out of her. The room quieted slightly, the tension palpable, as the students around them waited for her reaction. Maya didn't pause. She didn't let his words land. Her eyes never left her tray as she walked past him, her steps measured, the weight of their stares growing heavier with each second. But then, just as she reached the end of the table, she stopped. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head to look at him. The cafeteria held its breath. "You keep bringing up my dad like you're not the one who almost pissed himself when he saw him," Maya said, her voice calm, almost casual, but with a cutting edge that made the words hit harder than any physical blow. The silence was deafening. Bryce's expression faltered. His mouth opened, then closed again as he struggled to process her words. His friends exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if they should laugh or shrink into the background. But Maya didn't wait for them. She took her seat at the far end of the cafeteria, her expression unreadable, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm swirling in the room behind her. Bryce didn't know how to handle this. He couldn't break her, and that more than anything, unsettled him. The next morning, the air in Clearview High felt charged, like the calm before a storm. As soon as Maya stepped through the front doors, she could sense something was different. The usual buzz of conversation was thicker, heavier, and there was a palpable tension in the hallways. Students whispered in hushed voices, glancing over their shoulders, eyes flicking toward her like she was the center of some unfolding drama. It was the kind of energy that stirred something inside her, something familiar, something she had always known how to handle. When she reached her locker, she saw it immediately, her worst suspicion confirmed. The door was covered in printed screenshots, all taped haphazardly to the metal surface. Maya's heart sank, but she didn't let it show. The messages were all there. Vile, disgusting comments about people she barely knew, about teachers, about classmates. Each one laced with cruelty. Some were from weeks ago, some recent. But the timestamps weren't what made Maya's blood run cold. It was the realization that these weren't just idle gossip or harmless pranks. These were the words of someone who thrived on humiliation, who needed to make others feel small to feel big. And now, all of it, the secrets, the insults, the lies, was on full display for everyone to see. Bryce pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of panic as he saw the damage that had been done. He ripped the papers off the locker, his hands shaking, his voice rising in frustration. "What the hell is this?" he spat, his eyes wild as he looked from the papers to Maya. Maya stood there, her posture unflinching, watching as his perfect world began to crumble. She didn't need to say a word. The damage was done. His so-called friends stepped back, unsure, unwilling to be dragged down with him. They exchanged uneasy glances, one by one, before slinking away. Bryce, for the first time, was alone. Maya watched him, her gaze steady. "Did I do this?" she asked, her voice calm, controlled. Bryce's jaw clenched as he seethed with fury. "You think this makes you better than me?" he hissed. Maya tilted her head slightly, the corner of her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. "No, Bryce, I think this makes you exactly who you are. The only difference is, now everyone else sees it too." For a long moment, Bryce stood frozen, the words settling in the space between them. His fists clenched, his anger palpable, but there was nothing he could do. Not now. He turned on his heel, storming off through the hallway, his once confident swagger replaced by desperation. Maya didn't watch him go. She didn't need to. His kingdom had fallen, and she had nothing more to prove.